The global semiconductor industry currently utilizes over 100 million ounces of physical silver annually to facilitate the transition toward high-performance computing. This massive consumption of silver functions as the silent electrical nervous system of the modern digital empire. Financial markets are currently reacting to the emergence of Project Stargate, which is a $500 billion infrastructure initiative led by Microsoft and OpenAI. Project Stargate represents the largest single capital expenditure in the history of the technology sector. The chief analyst identifies this project as a fundamental shift in the global demand profile for industrial silver. Building a supercomputer of this magnitude requires a massive expansion of electrical infrastructure and high-speed data transmission. Silver possesses the highest electrical and thermal conductivity of any element on the periodic table. This unique physical property makes silver an absolute necessity for the specialized connectors and high-density circuitry required by advanced artificial intelligence. Project Stargate is not just a software initiative, but a massive physical construction project that will consume vast quantities of precious metals. The chief analyst observes that the current global silver mine production is failing to keep pace with these new industrial requirements. Wall Street is currently utilizing its sophisticated trading algorithms to secure physical silver inventories before the full impact of Stargate hits the market. Institutional desks are aggressively reacquiring silver from retail holders by maintaining an artificial sense of price volatility. They want the public to sell their physical metal today so that the big banks can satisfy the future needs of the technology giants. The $500 billion budget for Project Stargate is a direct signal that the demand for silver is now inelastic. Technology companies cannot build these massive data centers without a guaranteed supply of high-purity silver. The analyst notes that the cost of silver is a negligible fraction of the total project cost, but its absence would halt construction entirely. This makes silver a critical bottleneck in the race for artificial intelligence supremacy. Global silver inventories at the COMEX and the London Bullion Market Association have already reached decade lows. The chief analyst observes that the physical drain is accelerating as the first phase of Stargate begins its procurement cycle. Institutional buy orders are now bypassing the paper exchange and going directly to the miners to secure offtake agreements. This hidden demand is not reflected in the current spot price, which remains suppressed by paper short selling. The analyst identifies this as a strategic accumulation phase, where the smart money is moving to corner the physical market. The American manufacturing sector is also competing for this dwindling supply to support the domestic green energy transition. Photovoltaic cells and electric vehicle powertrains require substantial amounts of silver to function efficiently. The chief analyst observes that Project Stargate will act as a secondary booster to an already strained supply chain. The $500 billion reason why Wall Street wants your silver is to maintain their role as the ultimate gatekeepers of technology. They recognize that the future of the global economy is being built on a foundation of physical silver. Every high-frequency server and every fiber optic switch in the Stargate network will contain silver components. The analyst explains that the silver market is currently experiencing a historic supply deficit for the fourth consecutive year. This deficit is being temporarily filled by the liquidation of exchange-traded fund holdings and private silver collections. Once these inventories are exhausted, the market will be forced into a violent price discovery phase. Wall Street is banking on the fact that retail investors will be lured by small price increases and sell their metal early. The chief analyst maintains that the true value of silver in an AI-driven economy is significantly higher than current levels. Project Stargate is the primary catalyst that will force the market to recognize this fundamental reality. The structural mechanics of the silver market are now being driven by industrial necessity rather than monetary speculation. The $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure is a permanent addition to the demand side of the ledger. The analyst points out that silver mining production has remained stagnant despite the rising prices. It takes years of capital investment to bring a new silver mine into full production. This lag in supply ensures that the market will remain in a state of chronic shortage for the foreseeable future. Institutional risk management teams are now advising their clients to increase their exposure to physical metals. They recognize that silver is the only asset that provides both protection against inflation and exposure to technological growth. The chief analyst observes that the $85 price level was just the beginning of this revaluation. The $500 billion commitment to Project Stargate proves that the technology sector has no upper limit on what they will pay for essential materials. Wall Street is currently positioned to profit from this desperation by front-running the industrial buyers. The analyst highlights that the geopolitical tension between the East and the West is further complicating the silver supply chain. China currently controls a significant portion of the global silver refining capacity. This adds a layer of strategic risk for American companies like Microsoft and OpenAI. The chief analyst observes that the race for silver is becoming as important as the race for semiconductors. Without the metal, the chips cannot communicate and the power cannot flow. Project Stargate is the most ambitious computing project ever attempted, and it is built on silver. Wall Street wants your silver today because they know it will be worth a fortune tomorrow. The analyst concludes that the current market environment is a rare opportunity for those who hold physical assets. The data clearly shows that the era of abundant and cheap silver is officially over. The second phase of the institutional silver reacquisition revolves around the massive power requirements of Project Stargate. A $500 billion data center project requires a dedicated power grid equivalent to that of a mid-sized city. The chief analyst observes that the transition to sustainable energy sources for these facilities is a core requirement of the initiative. Silver is the essential material for high-efficiency photovoltaic cells, which will provide the majority of this power. Every square meter of solar panels utilized by the Stargate project will consume a precise amount of silver paste. Institutional investors are currently tracking the massive scale of these solar installations across the United States. They recognize that this massive industrial pull will remove millions of ounces of silver from the global market indefinitely. The chief analyst identifies this as a permanent reduction in the available float of silver bullion. Wall Street is utilizing its global network to source physical silver from every available corner of the market. They're offering premiums to retail dealers and bullion wholesalers to ensure they have the metal for their institutional clients. The analyst notes that the paper silver market is increasingly detached from the reality of these physical transactions. While the spot price appears to fluctuate within a narrow range, the actual cost of securing physical delivery is rising. Project Stargate is forcing a total revaluation of the silver supply chain from the mine to the refining facility. The chief analyst explains that the electrical infrastructure for these data centers involves massive silver-coated switches and breakers. Silver is preferred over copper for these critical components because it does not oxidize as easily and maintains lower resistance. For a project with a $500 billion budget, the reliability of the electrical system is paramount. The analyst observes that any failure in the power grid would result in billions of dollars in lost productivity and data. This ensures that the technology giants will never compromise on the quality of their electrical components. The chief analyst notes that the demand for silver from the electronics sector is projected to double by 2030. Project Stargate is the single largest driver of this growth in the current decade. Wall Street wants your silver because they are the ones financing the construction of these massive facilities. They understand that the collateral for these loans must be backed by the physical materials needed for completion. The analyst points out that the global silver market is incredibly small relative to the scale of the Stargate project. The total annual mine production of silver is approximately 820 million ounces. At a price of $30, the entire annual silver production is worth less than $25 billion. Project Stargate has a budget that is 20 times larger than the entire global silver production for a single year. The chief analyst identifies this as a massive capital imbalance that will inevitably force the silver price higher. When $500 billion of capital chases $25 billion of metal, the result is an explosive price move. Wall Street is currently using the Sunday openings and the holiday breaks to shake out retail sellers. They want to accumulate as much physical metal as possible before the true scale of the Stargate demand becomes public. The analyst observes that the mainstream financial media rarely mentions the silver requirements of AI infrastructure. This silence allows the institutional desks to continue their accumulation strategy without attracting too much attention. However, the chief analyst recognizes the patterns in the warehouse data and the delivery notices. There's a consistent and massive drain of silver from the registered vaults into private storage. This metal is being moved to secure the future needs of the technology and energy sectors. The analyst highlights that the silver market is currently in a state of structural backwardation. This means that the immediate demand for physical metal is so high that the spot price exceeds the future price. Project Stargate is the primary reason why this backwardation is persisting in the face of higher interest rates. The chief analyst maintains that the $82 exhaustion candle was the last chance for the bears. The market has now moved into a phase where the shorts are being liquidated by the sheer force of industrial buying. Wall Street is no longer betting against silver because they cannot afford to be wrong. They are now on the same side of the trade as the physical holders for the first time in history. The analyst observes that the cost of silver will eventually be passed on to the consumers of AI services. This means that silver is effectively being monetized by the technology sector. The chief analyst concludes that the $500 billion Stargate project is the ultimate bull case for silver. It represents a fundamental shift in the way the world values and utilizes precious metals. Silver is no longer just a shiny metal for jewelry or a speculative asset for traders. It is the most critical industrial material of the 21st century. The final part of the Project Stargate analysis focuses on the long-term impact on the global silver supply and the retail investor. The chief analyst posits that the $500 billion initiative will lead to a total exhaustion of global silver reserves. As the construction of the Stargate data centers accelerates, the competition for high-purity bullion will become fierce. Wall Street wants your silver today because they know that the price will eventually reflect the true cost of scarcity. The analyst observes that the mining industry is currently unable to find significant new silver deposits. The average grade of silver in existing mines has been declining for over 2 decades. This means that more energy and more capital are required to produce the same amount of metal. The chief analyst highlights that the energy cost of mining is a major floor for the silver price. If energy prices remain high, silver cannot return to its previous historical lows. Project Stargate will add a permanent layer of demand that will keep the market in a state of constant tension. The analyst notes that the retail public in the United States is currently holding a significant amount of silver in the form of coins and bars. Wall Street views this retail stockpile as the only available pool of metal that can satisfy the industrial demand. This is why there is a constant effort to discourage retail ownership through price manipulation and negative media coverage. The chief analyst observes that the institutions want the public to believe that silver is a dead asset. They want you to trade your physical metal for a digital currency or a high-priced tech stock. But the reality is that the technology companies themselves are desperate for the silver you hold. The analyst identifies a trend of large tech companies exploring the acquisition of silver mining assets. This would allow them to bypass the Wall Street middleman and the paper exchanges entirely. Project Stargate is the catalyst that could lead to a total vertical integration of the silver supply chain. The chief analyst observes that the $85 reversal was a signal that the floor is now firmly in place. Any attempt to push the price lower is immediately met by massive institutional buy orders. The analyst explains that the $500 billion budget for Stargate is just the tip of the iceberg. If the project is successful, it will lead to an entire ecosystem of AI infrastructure that will require even more silver. This is the beginning of a secular bull market in commodities that could last for 20 years. The chief analyst maintains that the only way to protect wealth in this environment is through the ownership of hard assets. Silver offers the most compelling combination of industrial utility and monetary scarcity. The analyst notes that the central banks of the East are already well ahead of the West in this realization. China and India have been accumulating silver at a record pace to support their own high-tech and green energy goals. Project Stargate is the American response to this global race for resource dominance. Wall Street wants your silver to ensure that the United States does not lose the lead in artificial intelligence. The chief analyst observes that the silver market is the ultimate arena of geopolitical and technological competition. The $83 break and the Sunday slaughter of the shorts are just the opening skirmishes. The real battle will be over the physical metal itself as the supply reaches zero. The analyst warns that the day is coming when silver will no longer be available for purchase by the retail public. Once the institutions and the tech giants have secured the supply, the window of opportunity will close. The chief analyst concludes that the $500 billion reason to hold silver has never been clearer. Project Stargate is a historic pivot point for the global economy and for the precious metals market. Those who hold their silver will be the ones who benefit from the massive wealth transfer currently underway. Wall Street knows this, and they are doing everything in their power to get your metal before it is too late. The analyst maintains a strictly professional and authoritative stance on this macroeconomic reality. The numbers do not lie, and the physical scarcity is undeniable. Silver is the blood of the new digital age, and the supply is running dry. The chief analyst provides this insight to ensure that the informed investor is prepared for the coming squeeze. The $500 billion revolution has begun, and it runs on silver.